Okay, so we are picking up where we left off last week as per usual, and we're going to pick up with King James taking over the throne for Queen Elizabeth. All right, so Queen Elizabeth has passed away. I forget what age I said. It was in her early to late 60s. She was in her 60s when she passed away. And James was King of Scotland at the time. And I don't think I mentioned this. I'll bring it back up. But when Elizabeth had passed away, she had set up the Church of England to be this sort of middle ground road between the Roman Church and the Protestant Church. Some of her decisions caused disunity in the church, and the Church of England has been in this massive flux since we started talking during the Reformation. Right from King Henry VIII, we've had just this flux in church doctrine, church authority, things of that nature. So we had Henry VIII, who was kind of a middle ground guy, and then we had Edward, who was basically a full-blown Protestant, and then we had Mary the First, who was full-blown Roman Church, and then Elizabeth going kind of back to what her father had, which was back to this middle ground, and this back and forth created division in the Church of England. And the division in the Church of England pretty much formed what we'll generally, and I said this before, it's general. It can be overgeneralized, and I'm still kind of overgeneralizing, but four groups that ends up having four groups within the Church of England, although I have separatists up there, and that's the first group. And the separatists aren't really part of the Church of England. They leave the Church of England. So the separatists, they believe the Church of England was beyond reform. The Puritans, and so the separatists leave the Church of England, right? And they start their own independent churches. And then the Puritans, they believe the church still can be reformed. There are issues within the church. They want to see those issues addressed and purify the church. And some have said that it's probably best to call them nonconformists instead of Puritans, since their spectrum of beliefs is very varied. You have some just that are just slightly more Protestant than the Church of England is currently, to those who would like to be the Church of England version of Presbyterian. Okay, so you have that whole spectrum there. And I say Church of England version of Presbyterian because I'll never be Presbyterian and affirm the core church polity of the Church of England. So they'll get as close as they can without actually changing the church polity. So then we have, so the Puritan, and so if you hear me say Puritan or nonconformist, I'm using them synonymously throughout this section of the lesson, so you know that I am using them that way. Then you had conformists. Conformists are whatever way the church goes, that's the way they're going to go as well. They're not going to rock the boat. They're going to submit to the authorities at hand. If they change with them. All right, so then you have the conformists. And then you have the avant-garde conformists, and they are the ones that some have said you could call them avant-garde conformists. They're the ones who are going to push the conformist or the Church of England agenda forward. They're going to fight for it. Another term that might be used for them is anti-Puritan. Okay, so they are going to push against the Puritans' reforms in the church and try to standardize and solidify the Church of England as it stands. I did say last week, and they'll be continued to call this way, avant-garde. Someone came up to me after my lesson last week and said, is it avant-garde or is it avant-garde? And it's the same term. Avant-garde is a later term. It's language changed. Grade becomes guard, and it's the same thing. So avant-garde is the earlier term, avant-garde is the later term, but it's the same term for both of them. And so this is what King James is left with. He's left with this division as he becomes King of England, King James the First of England, or King James the Sixth of Scotland. Same guy, two different titles, but he becomes King James the First of England. And when he got the official word to take the throne, that it was his, he began to travel towards England quite slowly. He didn't want to show up before the memorial service, before the funeral service of Elizabeth. He didn't want to appear too, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. He didn't want to appear too greedy. He took his time getting there. And after the memorial service, after all of the processions have concluded, he went to England. And on his way to England, he already started getting letters from the Puritans. And that's where we started talking about the millenary petition, or the humble petition of ministers of the Church of England desiring reformation of certain ceremonies and abuses of the church. And I'm not going to go through all of these again for the sake of time, but these are the issues that the that the Puritans had with the, come on, my computer's being slow, had with the Church of England. So one had to do with the church services, baptizing babies during asking babies questions during infant baptism, such as, do you affirm the creeds? And are you willing to be baptized? Things of that nature. And the Puritans are like, this is silly. We can baptize them without asking these questions. And so they wanted those types of things to be changed. Oh, they also, a big one, they didn't want women doing the baptisms. We talked about this last week. The women, the issue there, because I thought that was strange, because the Church of England doesn't have any place that allows them to have women doing the baptisms of babies. But what I did find out is that there was an exception, is when the midwives would be delivering the babies, and they would realize that the baby was going to die before the priest could get there, they would baptize the babies themselves. And so the Puritans were like, nope, we need that to stop. In fact, they made the case that in order for an infant baptism to be legitimate, it had to be in a formal service, and it had to be by a bishop or a priest. They also dealt with clergy dress. They wanted people examined, like interviewed before taking communion to see if they were worthy. They wanted certain wording changed in the prayer book. They wanted the church services to be shorter. They wanted the music to be simpler and more focused on doctrine. They wanted Sundays to be a restricted day from work. Do not work on Sundays. But on other holidays, such as like Good Friday or things of that nature, people should be allowed to work. They wanted a consistent teaching, like a doctrinal list, so everyone was on the same idea. They didn't want any Roman church beliefs to be taught or defended in the Church of England anymore. They wanted the bowing of Jesus's name to stop. Every time the priest said Jesus's name, the people would bow. They wanted that to stop. And then they only wanted the official canon of the Bible to be recognized as authoritative in the church, so as opposed to the Apocrypha. And then concerning church ministers, this had to do with the preacher's ability to preach and teach, the pastor's ability to preach and teach, and they only wanted capable, well-educated men to be ministers, and that they should preach regularly and really focus on preaching on the Lord's Day, Sunday. And then, and then if they weren't capable of preaching, if they weren't doing a good job, to remove them and provide them financial support for the rest of their life, or if they had a good income, require them to hire someone to preach on their behalf going forward. So there was that. Concerning church ministers had to do with primarily how they made their money. So no double dipping, no triple dipping, getting extra jobs in the church as well as their other paid jobs. They just said it hurt everybody to do that. Things wouldn't be done well. No renting out your ministry, things of that nature. So I couldn't rent out, I gave the example, I couldn't rent out my Sunday school class to someone else and make money off of that. That's the kind of stuff that they were doing. And then church discipline. They wanted a fair church discipline. They wanted to confirm that non-clergy members could not do excommunication. They couldn't excommunicate for small things. They wanted to make sure the local pastor had a say in the excommunication. Stop charging unreasonable fees, and so on. So that was the petition. All right, that was this type of stuff that the Puritans sent to James and said, hey, we want to see these things change in the Church of England. So after James became king, he does the Hampton Court Okay, Hampton Court is where he was going to address some of these issues. And so remember, this is what I wanted to make sure I circled back around. Scotland, where James was king, was heavily Presbyterian. Okay, John Knox had come back. It was heavily Presbyterian. It was a safeguard for Presbyterianism. And when James was coming to England, they weren't sure what kind of ruler James was. And the reason they weren't sure what kind of ruler James was, although they did make assumptions that he would be favorable towards Presbyterianism because he was king of Scotland and Scotland was Presbyterian. They didn't know what kind of ruler he might be because when James became king, he was a year old. He was a year old when he became king. And so up to this point, let's see. Oh man, I should have done the math. But anyway, he's still a young king at this point. And so he hasn't had a whole lot of dealings. So people are a little unsure as to which, now that he's old enough, he's a man on his own, he can actually make his own decisions and he can rule. They think he might be favorable towards Presbyterianism. Therefore, he might be favorable towards the Puritans. So that's what the hope was, that he would be favored towards the Puritans. Now, when he decided to do Hampton Court, this was when it became fairly obvious where his allegiances were. When he did Hampton Court was where he was going to gather the church leaders together and he was going to work out some of these issues. And when he's going to do 3 days of Hampton Court. And the first clue that something was off was that he invited 20 roughly 20 of the avant-garde conformists, so the ones that are going to push the agenda forward, and only four Puritans. He only asked 4 Puritans to show up. And then on day 1, he doesn't let the Puritans come into Hampton Court. He only talks with the avant-garde conformists. And then this historian, I think he puts it to, I meant to say this last week and I forgot, but this historian, I should have written his name down too, which I did not. It's because I was trying to track down the actual quote and I couldn't remember where I got it. But he says, with regard to King James coming from Scotland and coming to England, from Presbyterian Scotland to Church of England, Anglican England, it says he went out from them, the Presbyterians, because he was never of them. So he was never a Presbyterian. In fact, as you begin to read his views, you can tell he has quite a dislike for Presbyterians. Okay, so the Puritans, who thought we might have a king that would be favorable towards us, are going to find out pretty quickly that he is not favorable towards them. And when he begins the conference, he has an hour-long speech that he is not there to alter or change anything. He is there to confirm what he found was well settled already. So he wants to stay. He wants to stay with what Elizabeth did. He just wants to hold firm. What Elizabeth did was good, and we're going to stick with that. Now, he said he was not calling the assembly for any innovation, and innovation in that day, it was pretty much synonymous with heresy. Okay, so if you said, if the claim was, oh, you're innovating, that claim was you're a heretic. Because the idea, and the idea is still kind of true today, I still agree with it, is if it's new, it's not Christian, because Christianity is a historic religion. So innovation would be a heretical thing. So if you were accused of innovation, you were being accused of heresy, essentially. So he says, we're not here for innovation. We're not here to start anything new. He wants to hold to what's been approved by the manifold blessings of God himself, is how he puts it. So he wants to give no occasion for factious spirits. He doesn't want anything to cause division. And he called the avant-garde conformists in because he does not want them to be confronted by contrary opponents. He wants to hear what they have to say, what's been established, and he doesn't want any interruption. So he sets the agenda that there are going to be issues with really I failed to mention it in my review, but the issues are with the Book of Common Prayer. That's what the Puritans want updated. They want the Book of Common Prayer to be updated. The Book of Common Prayer has some issues in it regarding how the church is run, and they want to see the way that they would have their requests met is by updating the Book of Common Prayer. Okay, so all of those things that was on there that say, hey, let's update the Book of Common Prayer to meet our requests. And so issues with the Book of Common Prayer, general absolution, and then private baptisms by laypersons. So that was the first thing on their agenda. We talked about this last week. James said he would sooner have his children baptized by an ape than by a woman. And the bishops also discussed ancient fathers baptizing with sand when water was unavailable. And I told you he was quite vulgar in the way he responded. He said, that's a turd for an argument. He might as well have pissed on them. And for that, more likely to be water than sand. That was his response, okay? He was quite I'm going to be fair here for a second, though. If you read anybody during the Reformation period, Luther, Calvin, James, Daniel Featley, Zwingli, these guys, when they don't like each other and they don't like what they've heard, they are pretty vulgar about how they respond, all the way around. And so anyway, that was James. That was the culture of the day. Today, that would be much less, that's frowned upon today. And for good reason, I think. All right, excommunication in ecclesial courts, and then provision for Protestant preachers, and provision for Protestant preachers for Catholic Ireland. So they wanted to deal with Ireland as well. Ireland is this interesting flux. It's still very much Roman Church, but James, when he becomes king, he also calls himself King of Ireland, though he doesn't really. By doing so, he's claiming right to Ireland, but Ireland doesn't recognize him. It's still very much Roman Church. And so this was a kind of a status move of King James. By calling himself King of Ireland, he's asserting authority where the authority is being disputed. But he's saying, yeah, it's mine. Okay, so that's that. All right, day two. Day two, he gave presents to the Puritans. And in this case, John Reynolds would be the spokesperson for the Puritans. Again, James made a brief speech determining he's not to innovate the government presently established. He's going to settle a uniform order through the whole church, plant unity by suppressing of papists and enemies to the religion, and to amend abuse. So one of the things that they brought up right away, that John Reynolds brought up as a representation of the Puritans, was the baptism of women. And he was like, already been decided. Now, he decided in their favor, right? That's not going to happen anymore. But they never got a say. So he was like, that's already been decided. We've moved on. Let's continue. And so the 4 points that Reynolds wanted to address was doctrine, ministry, church government, discipline, and subscription. And so really what I want to focus on, and you can actually look up some of this. If you go to kjbhistory.com, Timothy Berg has a website in which he deals with some of these issues more poignantly. For example, if you remember in the petition, part of the petition was what the priest would wear. They had all of this formal attire, and the Puritans were like, we want to get rid of that formal attire. And so if you go to something like kjbhistory.com, you'll see why this was such a big deal to them. The cultural implications, the Roman Church connections, things of that nature. I'm not getting into all of that right now, but he gets into that a lot deeper than I do. But what I really want to deal with is day two, what's happening in day two. Again, issues are with the Book of Common Prayer. That's where the issues are. And Reynolds, during the debate internal debate during day two about the Book of Common Prayer, some of the things that he was bringing up that he had issues with was at one point, and we talked about this, I've been kind of building to this point because this is the point. He says the Book of Common Prayer has multiple translations in it, right? So we've got Coverdale's translation, because that's the Bible that was being used when the Book of Common Prayer started to be made. Then the Great Bible, that's in there. And then the Bishop's Bible is now in there. And so they're saying, hey, for the sake of uniformity, we should have one translation for the whole Book of Common Prayer. Now you can see where I'm going with this. We should have one translation for the Book of Common Prayer. Now, the Bishop's Bible was not well received. It was not considered as nearly as scholarly or as accurate as the Geneva Bible. But King James himself hated the Geneva Bible, not the translation. He hated the footnotes. And this is how he describes the footnotes. They're very partial, untrue, seditious, and savoring too much dangerous and traitorous conceits. And so due to this, King James does not want the Geneva Bible to be the Bible that underlies the Book of Common Prayer. The Bishop's Bible has already been demonstrated not to be the best scholarly translation. So this becomes the suggestion on day 2 by Reynolds. Let's have one uniform translation for the Book of Common Prayer. On day 3, it was composed of 2 sessions, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And it was at that point that King James said, let's do it. Let's update the Bishop's Bible, and the product of that update would be the ability to update the Book of Common Prayer with one uniform translation. And so that is the point at which it was decided we're going to have a new translation. Now, it wasn't decided that it was going to be called the King James Bible. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But it was decided that there was going to be an update to the Bishop's Bible. That's happening. And King James immediately, he's like, all right, we're going to do this, but we're going to do this my way. All right. And he sets in 15 rules, 15 instructions from King James to the translators. Now, how small is that for you guys? Most of you probably can't read that, I'm guessing. All right, that's okay. It's there on the on the YouTube video. It will be there if you want to zoom in on it. I'm going to read each one, and then I'll just summarize what he's getting at there. So instruction number 1, the ordinary Bible read in church, commonly called the Bishop's Bible, to be followed as little altered as the original will permit. So whoever's going to do this translation work, they're going to start with the Bishop's Bible. That is their base Bible. They're doing what's called a revision. So I've talked about this before. There are 2 kinds of Bible translations. There are revisions, in which you've updated a virgin translation. A virgin translation this is the first time it's been done. It's straight from scratch. We are taking the Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, the source languages, the textual criticisms, all of that. We're going to start from scratch, and we're going to put a new translation on without relying on any previous translation. Okay? And then there are revisions. Revisions are someone's already done a virgin translation, and we're revising. So we're just going to update it. We're going to find the weaknesses in certain areas, and we're going to strengthen it. We're going to make it better. The King James is going to be a revision, not a virgin translation. It's going to be a revision of the Bishop's Bible. And then second point, the names of the prophets and holy writers and other names in the text to be retained as near as may be according to how they are vulgarly used. Okay, so they want to keep the commonly used Latin names and not update them to new names. So this is just so you're aware of this. Actually, you probably saw this when we were talking about Beza and the issues with son of Canaan in the Septuagint, in the Masoretic text, and we read some of the genealogies, and you might have noticed, I'm sure you did, you couldn't help but notice, is that in one translation, one of the people were called Sala, and in another translation, he was called Sheila. It was the same name, but they were spelt very differently. And one has to do with how it's transliterated. Is it transliterated more closely to the Septuagint, in this case, or the Masoretic text, or the Septuagint? The Septuagint or the Masoretic text? Is it more, which one is it transliterating from? Okay. Here he's wanting the transliteration to stay closer to the Latin Vulgate, because that is what is vulgarly used, is people are using certain names that are common. this still impacts us today, actually. For example, if you open your Bible to the book of James, okay, the book of James. How about if I told you to open your Bible to the book of Jacob? Would you know where to turn? Probably not. Well, the book of Jacob is how almost every translation outside of English handles the book of James, because it is, if you look at the Greek, it's Jacobus. And so the transliteration would be Jacob. And so because we've used the transliteration from Latin, that's what's been standardized from before the King James. We still use James. And I remembered, actually, I picked up on this because I was listening to a missionary who was having a conference with other missionaries in an area, and he was new to the area. And these missionaries were from other places, and they spoke English as their second language. And he asked them to turn to the book of James, and they didn't know where to go. And so he said, well, what do you call it? The book of Jacob. And so that became, he was like, oh, okay. And that's when I realized, wait a minute, we are the oddballs worldwide. We're the oddballs for calling it the book of James, because that's the Latin transliteration. I do suspect, I would like to see, no publisher is willing to do this because it rocks the boat, but I would like to see publishers start using a closer transliteration to the Greek and calling it the book of Jacob. But that's just not what we're used to. And publishers are leery to rock the boat. But if you ever see it, there is a small group of people pushing for more Greek transliterations to be more accurate to the Greek than our current translations are doing. So if you ever do see it, it's because that movement is growing, that we should be using the book of Jacob instead of the book of James. It's just the title, the content's the same, just so we're all on the same page. It's just whether or not we transliterate it as James from the Latin or Jacob from the Greek. Okay, the third argument the third rule he has is old ecclesial words to be kept as the word church, not to be translated congregation. This is a direct shot at Tyndale. Tyndale was, when he did his translation, he didn't use the word church. When he talked about the church at Smyrna or the church at Rome or the church at Corinth, he always said congregation. The congregation at Smyrna, the congregation at Rome, the congregation at Corinth. And that was very controversial for him to do that in his day. Everyone wanted the word church. It impacts us today. We still use the word church in all of our translations, though some would argue that church and congregation are synonymous, and I do think they are to some degree. King James saw it a little differently. He wanted the word church used. He believed there was a difference, and church was the correct thing to use. So the King James translators were not allowed to use congregation in place of church. Okay, when referring to a church of certain place, congregation was not a translation option for them. Okay. Rule number 4, when any word has diverse significations that to be kept, which has been most commonly used by the most eminent fathers, being agreeable to the propriety of the place and analogies of faith. I can't wait till I can get to some modern English stuff for you guys. So all he's saying here is diverse significations is what we would say different senses. Okay, when a word has different senses and those senses, more than one of them can fit the context, they want them to use the sense that most closely resembles the sense of the early church fathers in Latin. So here are your options. You can use any one of these. James said, okay, I don't want you using any one of these. I want you to use the one that most closely resembles a sense that was used and interpreted by a church father. Okay, those are your options. All right, this is actually really, really interesting. Again, because he's not looking for innovation. He wants to hold on to the old. So there's that. I'm going to finish the sentence though. Most commonly used by church fathers, agreeable to the propriety of the place, meaning don't pick a sense that doesn't make sense in the context. Okay, which is what no translator would do. Anyway, this should go without being said. But anyway, he's saying you've got multiple senses. Don't pick the one that doesn't make sense. And also don't pick the one that is, or pick the one that is agreeable to the analogies of faith. And he's talking about the Church of England. Don't contradict Church of England doctrines. Okay, so find the sense that matches church fathers. Don't use senses that don't make sense in the context, and don't contradict Church of England doctrines. Now, this is actually really interesting because what is the Church of England at this time? At this time, the Church of England is this middle ground between the Roman Church and Protestants, right? So they stand in this middle ground. What they are attempting to be is ecumenical in some sense. They want this unity to pull the Protestants in and pull the Roman Church in. And so to produce a translation like this would be favorable both in his mind, both towards the Protestants, the Puritans, the Church of England, and the Roman Church. So the Apocrypha is going to stay. The Apocrypha is going to stay in the King James Bible. It's already been removed from the Geneva Bible at this point. He's not going to go that route. He's going to keep the Apocrypha in, but he's going to separate it. It's going to be in the center of the Bible, which he's not doing. This is not innovation on his part. This has been the practice since Luther. Luther had already moved it to the center of the Bible. He's going to maintain that practice, but he's not going to get rid of it altogether. All right. And so this was beneficial for the King James translation as a whole because it would receive wider reception than the Geneva Bible, which was a fully Protestant Bible. And at that point, as I already said, had removed the apocryphal books. So this really made the Church of England the perfect breeding ground for an ecumenical translation that would be more widely accepted than other translations like the Geneva Bible or the most recently translated Douay-Rheims Bible. So you had a full Roman Church Bible and you had a full Protestant Bible, and now you're going to have a Church of England Bible, this sort of middle ground, which is what the Church of England was. So I found that to be very interesting. Rule number 5, the division of chapters to be altered either not at all or as little as may be if necessity so require. So the chapter divisions put down by Stephanus in 1559. And the chapter, that's for the New Testament. For the Old Testament, it was Stephen Langton. We talked about him. He wants to maintain those, and he does. We have, or they do, I should say. And then number 6, no marginal notes at all to be affixed, but only for the explanation of Greek and Hebrew and Greek words, which cannot, without some circulation, so briefly and fitly be expressed in the text. James does not want marginal notes. It's what he hates about the Geneva Bible, is the marginal notes. So he doesn't want marginal notes, but he has an exception. If it helps the reader to understand translation difficulties and textual variants and things of that nature, you can do so, but you have to do it briefly in the margin. Can't be this long explanation. It just needs to be a brief note. It has to be brief because the Geneva Bible was not unknown for having long explanations of certain issues. He wants them brief, succinct, and nothing doctrinal. It has to just be about the translation and language. Okay. Number 7, such quotations of places to be marginally set down shall serve for the fit reference of one scripture to another. Oh, this is the other exception. You can have cross-references. Okay, so number 7 is you can put cross-references if you want, but they're in the margin. 8, 9, and 10, we're going to deal with in the next slide, but 8 is every particular man of each company takes the same chapters having translated or amended them severally by himself, where he thinks good, all to meet together to confirm what they have done and agree for their part what shall stand. That's 8. 9, as any one company hath dispatched any one book in this manner, they shall send it to the rest to be considered seriously and judiciously, for his majesty is very careful on this point. He's very concerned about this being the way it's done. We'll talk about it. And then argument number 10, or rule number 10, if any company upon the review of the book so sent shall doubt or differ upon any place, to send them word thereof, to note places, and therewithal to send their reasons, to which, if they consent not, the difference to be compounded at the general meeting, which is to the chief persons of each company at the end of the work. All of this is procedural, okay? How are we going to go about dealing with disagreement on how to translate? That's what all of this is for. That will be, we'll deal with that in the next slide, so I'm not going to explain it here because it will make more sense in the next slide, what's happening, okay? Argument 11. When any place of special obscurity is doubted, letters are to be directed by authority to send to any learned man in the land for his judgment of such a place. So here they're saying, hey, if you're just not sure, as a translation committee, you're not sure what a word should translate as, to find someone who's an expert in that area, write them, consult them, and then bring that consultation back and let everyone else know what the consultant said. Okay. So these would not be people on the translation team, but people outside the translation teams that would help with the translation. Okay. In that particular point. Rule 12, letters to be sent from every bishop to the rest of clergy, admonishing them of this translation in hand, and move in charge as many as, being skillful in tongues, have taken pains in that kind to send their particular observations to the company, either at Westminster, Cambridge, or Oxford, according as it was directed before in the king's letter to the archbishop. So here he's just saying to the archbishop, he's saying to him, let the bishops know that we're going to do this work. And if anyone is capable and wants to help, let them know. Let's get them on the team, okay? The directors, number 13, the directors in each company are to be the deans of Westminster and Chester for Westminster, and the king's professors in Hebrew and Greek in the two universities. So there's going to be two deans of the respective colleges, which in this case would be kind of like a parachurch organization that are going to oversee the process of the two professors. And two professors of the Greek and Hebrew will be involved as well. So we're going to have two professors. They're not going to be part of the daily work, but they're going to help oversee the process. And it's going to be these colleges, the colleges that are going to help do this work. Okay. All right. 14. These translations to be used when they agree better with the text, the original text, than the bishop's Bible. So if other translations have done better work than the bishops, these are the ones you're allowed to use. You can use Tyndale's, you can use Coverdale's, you can use Matthew's Bible or Rogers, you can use Cranmer's, or you can use the Geneva Bible. So here you see, he even lets them use the Geneva Bible as a source text, just not the footnotes. Okay, the footnotes is where he had his major issue. So if the bishop's Bible is lacking in another area, and in one of these translations have done a better job, go ahead and copy what that translation did. Okay. And of course, this also means they can't violate rules 3 and 4 still. All right. If congregation was in fact a better translation than church, they still can't use it. That's not an option for them. Okay. All right. And then number 15, it's 3 or 4 of the most ancient and grave divines in either universities not employed in translation to be assigned to be overseers of the translation for the better observation of the 4th rule. All right, so this is the one. They're like, okay, with all of the other people overseeing it, we're going to have even more people overseeing this particular rule. So go back to rule 4, use the sense that best fits with an early church father. These 3 or 4 individuals overseeing this are intended to make sure that rule in particular is being followed. Okay, so you're going to have to know your church history to know what sense that they opted for. Okay, this is according to Rule 12, the letters were sent out, and this becomes the translation committee. Okay, I don't know how well you can see all their names. It's up there just so you can look into them if you want to. The translation committee, King James approved a list of 54 men. Okay, so 54 men were approved to work on the translation. Some never actually work on it. Some die before the translation starts. Some die when the translation is in its infancy. And so now we say 47 men did the bulk of the work. Okay, so 47 men did the bulk of the work. Now, if you actually count all the names up there, there's actually 57 names. And that's because there's more than one list today of the approved translators. And when you put all of the lists together, you end up with 3 extra names. And I don't know exactly which 3 names are the extra 3 of the list of 54. Because 54 is what's commonly reported. But then the list of all the names, there's some variances. So what I did, if you're so curious and you want to investigate it further, I put asterisks next to the ones that are more likely to be extra names, but there's more than just 3, okay? So, because there's a variation. So those are the ones where I thought was questionable. The rest of them aren't questioned, okay? All right. And so as we start to wrap this up, so let me tell you what 8, 9, and 10, 8, 9, and 10. They were divided into groups, all right? So there were 2 groups at each college. The first Westminster Company and the second Westminster Company. The second Westminster Company is going to work on the epistles. The first Westminster Company is going to work on Genesis to 2 Kings. Okay, that's their portion. The first Cambridge Company is going to work on First Chronicles, the Song of Solomon. And the second Cambridge Company is going to work on translating the Apocrypha. Okay. And then the first Oxford Company is going to do Isaiah to Malachi. And the second Oxford Company is going to do the Gospels, Acts, and Revelation. And so those are mini translation committees for each section of the Bible. Then those people are going to be broken down into groups of 2, roughly 2 or 3, and they're going to work on a portion of their portion. So Genesis to 2 Kings would be broken down into groups of 2 or 3. So they'd be tackling. So you don't have like a whole committee working on that whole section. You have 2 or 3 people working on each small portion of their section. Okay. And the idea, the expectation is you'd be turning out about a chapter a day. Okay. Sorry, is it a chapter a day? A chapter a week. You'd be turning out about a chapter a week. Okay. That was the expectation for each of these groups. Once an individual translator completed the assigned portion, it was circulated to the other members of their panel for collaborative review. During this stage, the translators compared their individual works, debated nuances, and collectively agreed on the most appropriate rendering. And when they didn't, they had a process, if you go back to 8, 9, and 10, on how to handle that disagreement. Following a panel level review, the revised text was then shared with the other 5 panels for further scrutiny and feedback. So the other ones would now review it. This multi-stage process ensured that the translation benefited from diverse expertise and perspectives of the entire body of the translators. Subsequently, the text was also shared with other scholars who were not a part of the original 54 or 47. And those ones would be where they weren't sure what the translation would be, so they're looking for more expert help. And then there was a general meeting in London where the final version would be approved, okay? It'll take them 7 years to complete this project. And then there's a couple of other historical events, but one in particular that I just want to mention because it happens the very next year they started is the Gunpowder Plot or the Jesuit treason. The Roman Church really struggled with the direction of the Church of England. They wanted to bring the Church of England back like it was under Mary I, Bloody Mary, back under Roman rule. And so you might be familiar with Robert Catesby, and Guy Fawkes, who were, Catesby was the mastermind. Guy Fawkes was the one who ultimately gets caught trying to blow up Parliament and kill everybody in it, including King James. And that's where this poem comes from. Remember, the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason, and plot. I see no reason why gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Guy Fawkes, was his intent to blow up the king and Parliament. 80 barrels of powder below, poor old England to overthrow. By God's providence, he was catched with a dark lantern and a burning match. Holler boys, let the bells ring. Holler boys, God save the king. Interestingly enough, part of the reason I threw this in here is because 4 times in the Old Testament, the King James translators translate a particular Hebrew phrase as God save the king, even though God is not in the Hebrew at all there. The word God is not in the Hebrew. It's better translated as long live the king, okay? And this would be an idiomatic, paraphrastic expression of long live the king. It would be God save the king, because this was something that literally happened while they were translating the Bible. And so might be a callback to their personal king and what was happening there. God save the king. So 1611, the King James Bible is completed. We will pick up the uniqueness, the things that are unique about the King James Bible, but primarily we're going to start with the preface, probably the best preface to ever be written in any Bible I've ever read, in my personal opinion. And we'll talk about the preface of the King James Bible. It's very good. We're going to spend some time in that before we move on to, we're going to jump ahead about 300 years when this is done. All right. You all are dismissed. Thank you.